Welcome to your first Creative Mornings Oakland. We did it. Our theme this month is Rebel, so let's get rebellious today. Let me introduce to you the man of the hour. He is the current VP of Creative here at Pandora. He's the head of a multidisciplinary media creative team. He's been with the company since 2006. He's seen it grow tremendously and has been through thick and thin. He's done his fair share of coloring outside the lines. Please help me welcome the rebel himself, Tony Calzaretta.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm very honored to be the first speaker for Creative Mornings Oakland. I think it's tremendous to see. In June, I'll hit 8 years at Pandora, and I've been coming to this neighborhood for that whole time. And it's really mind-blowing to see what's happened in this neighborhood and the amazing art and culture coming out, new businesses launching weekly, and again, it's just a really fantastic opportunity to be here. So today I am going to talk about the theme Rebel. I'm not going to change it and rebel against the theme, although it did occur to me to maybe do that. I think I just want to sort of make the connection to Pandora, because I'm going to meander and sort of walk you through times in my life that have sort of led up until the work I've done at Pandora and having longevity in the creative field and creating things for a living. So I think very early on, I had a thought in my mind that I really want to just, really young, I want to do art for music. And that sort of continually held with me for 37 years, maybe since I was born. So, you know, at Pandora, we do have a multidisciplinary team, and I feel very lucky to have that because I think it's pretty rare. We have 43 people now across product design, brand marketing design, advertising design, and then we have a fantastic audio creative team that does amazing things in the audio realm and creating content for us and experimenting. So I just feel very lucky to have this team and to be able to collaborate with them. I want to establish something about work. I think there's really today I'm going to talk about two different sides of the work. The actual physical work that we do, the work that we output, whether it's advertising projects, t-shirt designs, pieces of music. It's sort of the physical output of the work. And then there's the second part of the work, which is the work we do as individuals, the internal work, the work within the mind to sort of grow and challenge ourselves in the creative field. And that's the most difficult work. A lot of people have natural born talent and they can develop that talent, but it's really what happens inside of you to nurture, grow, and become the best creative that you can, no matter what your discipline is. So I think with that, the sort of work within, when I talk about it, is that doubt, that fear, that uncertainty, the uncomfortability that happens in the mental and emotional states when we create and grow. So I think we have the tendency as creatives to become our own worst enemies and stifle our growth. I think I see a lot, having grown these teams, that the bottom line is that I strongly believe that we all control our creative careers and our creative paths. And I think that we can be our biggest roadblocks. It's not our bosses or the companies that define us. It's ourselves that sort of are our limiters of how far we can go. And so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit through a bunch of concepts, moments, people that have really inspired me and that I've sort of built my career around. So these are my rebels of inspiration, and that's the way I chose it. In my mind, that these people have rebellious concepts. They go against the norm. And it may not be a traditional definition of rebellion, but certainly in my mind, I felt like these iconic moments and people have really helped me become who I am. And so the subtitle of my talk today is Crossing Guards, Hip Hop, the Hammond B3, Dragons, and Negative Capability. So we're going to learn a lot about those things today. Before I sort of jump into chronological order, I'd like to start with a quote from when I was in college from my painting professor. And I think this quote sort of solidifies my drive. This was when we were all graduating. We did all these senior reviews, and then you had a show. I sort of rebelled against the graphic design program while I went in there and ended up showing in painting and drawing, exiting college to get my BFA. And he sat us all down. He said, in 5 years, 4 of you will be creating for a living. In 10 years, 1 of you will be. And I always wanted to be that one person. Like, I think I wanted to beat the odds, and I wanted to have that longevity. And again, sort of these concepts that I'm going to talk to you, I feel like have allowed me to do that. So part one, we're going to break it into crossing guards and hip-hop and figure out what that means. I wrote on my tag this morning, my most rebellious moment was being a volunteer crossing guard. It was 1986. I was 10 years old in 5th grade, and I became a volunteer crossing guard. It doesn't feel very rebellious, does it? So while I wish that was me, it's not. But I certainly still wear my hair like that from time to time. So, you know, you think, a crossing guard, how rebellious can this be? Well, I don't think I was the safest crossing guard. And again, it's sort of like we're going to enter quickly into my first moment of music. I think I already had an affinity for music at 10 years old, but I felt like it was my siblings' music. I felt like it was my friends' brothers' tastes, and it wasn't mine. And I remember asking for Christmas because people were getting these when they came out, the boombox. It's like I had to have one. And I was playing tapes, and it was great. And then I thought, well, what a way to spice up the crossing guard corner in the morning with walking little kids, but to bring my boombox on top of my shoulder and walk kids across the street. And it was only because these guys were really hitting at that moment. And it was 1986, and Raising Hell came out. And certainly, I lived in the suburbs of Chicago, grew up there. And that was when suburban kids were exposed to hip-hop music through that album, and it was just on repeat. That was probably the only thing that I played, and not a very appropriate album to be playing in 5th grade, and certainly my parents hated it, so it felt extra special to me. But it was really, I felt like this music was mine. Like, I didn't feel like it was somebody else's, and I felt like that this new life and energy in it, and I just remember thinking, it's like, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this. And 2 years earlier, something fantastic happened. While I didn't see it in theaters because I was only 8, Beat Street came out. You know, I was drawing all along in the early life, and I remember seeing this on VHS probably around 1986 also, and there was a guy in there, for anybody who's seen it, Ramo. He was the graffiti piece. So we had the breakers, we had the DJs and rappers, and then we had the graffiti side. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, all these, the culture of hip hop and the way everything intertwined. The dancers fed from the music, the artists fed from the dancers and the music. It was just something like, I just remember thinking, it's like, I want to do this. And it wasn't necessarily like, you know, probably then I was like, I want to be Ramo, like, I want to go bomb, you know, train cars and all that. No, I was too young to understand how to really even get going. But and so exiting grade school, I was still pretty strong with this, and getting into junior high, I stole my. I think it was the first time I probably committed a real crime. I remember going to the art store and pocketing the Fat Cap Magnum marker Sharpies into my coat, and then going immediately outside behind the art store and finding a white truck and writing some weird name like Looney Tunes, which that's not even an appropriate tag. Like, that's like common, you don't go more than like 3-4 letters. Like, so I don't know what I was combining 2 words, and maybe it was still, I was into cartoons too much or something. But that was it, and then I developed names and sort of played around with it from time to time, and which took me into high school, where the trouble picked up from there. I got in a lot of trouble for missing school and defacing school property. And so I was, in the bathroom stalls, drawing murals on the backside of doors, in the locker room, drawing in the showers. On every single desk I sat at, I had to draw something. And I think my mom got a call because they didn't know where I was and I wasn't in school. And I remember having to meet with a school counselor about what was going on. And strangely enough, my school had so many kids that we actually had a graphic designer on staff. And so they decided to, instead of trying to play into my strengths and positivity in art, maybe instead of going to study hall, I should go work for the graphic designer at the school for an hour a day. And that was certainly a life-changing moment also, and was really my first exposure to the computer. I think it was a Quadra, if anybody is old enough to remember that stuff. And I know it was definitely Photoshop too. And so it was fun, it was school team logos, events. I did a lot of laminating, so not a lot of design for classrooms and things like that. But certainly, I was interacting daily with somebody who had went to school for this, and that was positively influencing me in the right ways. So I just sort of upheld that, and it was time to sort of think about college. Certainly we did more of getting in trouble and all that good stuff, but this was starting to change my view of what could happen. And so I go into the college years, part two, talking about the Hammond B3 and the Dragon. And certainly, again, we return to the connection to music. And for anybody that's sort of a vintage keyboard fan, the Hammond B3 just was like, puts out this really warm, dirty, raw sound that the first time I heard it, I was like, what is this instrument? And I need more of it. And I was just purely reacting to it. But the first couple of years of college, I messed around. Again, not very serious. But still really involved in music, and art was always there, but I wasn't like getting serious about it yet. And I went home in '95 or '96, and my friend's older brothers took us to Northwestern University down on Lake Michigan in Chicago to a free concert. And it was the time when anybody in the jam band scene, it was like a Fish was on some hiatus or something, and Medeski, Martin, and Wood, which is an organ trio, but a modern version of the organ trio, was playing, and I had never heard of them. And we got on the first line, and I saw John Medeski, the keyboard player, play all his vintage keyboards, but certainly the Hammond. And his mouth was moving. He was like physically interacting with this instrument differently than I'd ever seen another musician before. And again, it was great. So I went back to school and I was like, who is this guy? What is this instrument? He wrote a lot about practicing and developing his craft. And there's this really great quote from him. There's a number of these quotes, but it's about the sonic potential of the instrument as a vehicle for creating sound and color. And it was that moment I saw a musician referencing color. And I was like, that's my world. Why are you talking about color? But certainly started to open up my mind that we can learn a lot about our own personal disciplines, our own personal crafts, but we don't have to be directly connected to them. We can be just inspired by them. And so then it was starting to open up my mind on like, well, what could I bring into art from the world of music? Can you make a line lyrical? Can you paint melodically? Like, all kinds of ideas were coming to my head. But it was certainly a defining moment. There was a point where John Medeski was talking about, in the earlier part of this quote, he was talking a lot about what people were doing with the Hammond at the time, and it was really repeating history. So there was a lot of soul jazz, what was going on, what was called organ trios early on in the late 50s and early 60s, and it was a Hammond B3 organ, a guitarist and a drummer, no bassist because the bass was played on the pedals of the Hammond organ or on the second manual keyboard. And so I started really, I remember going to Borders and just sitting there not wanting to buy anything and looking through books, trying to find out where the origins of this sound that John Medeski had. And I got turned on to, in the previous slide, Jimmy Smith, and I'm sure a lot of people may know him. And then there was this other light bulb that went off, and it was like Jimmy Smith Root Down. Well, I remember the Beastie Boys Ill Communication Root Down. And it was really like this, another epiphany of like, well, this whole sampling and like all this music I liked as a kid has all this history and roots. And like, what can I learn from it, and what can I take into my own craft, or just purely be inspired by it? I think it was at that time when I was really doing this research on the Hammond, I was getting really serious about art at this point. I was sort of done messing around. It was probably my junior year in college or end of my sophomore year. And I had this painting professor, LYLE SALMI, that I referenced at the beginning. And when we first met, I was like, oh man, this guy's a dick. Like, he doesn't get me. Like, he doesn't know what art's about. And I was totally wrong, as we are at that age. And I took my first painting class, like traditional oil painting class with him, and I'd been taking a lot of figure drawing with him, but we weren't really interacting. And he came over to me. I think I had a picture of these, like a dry desert scene, and draw a painting, a landscape with all this like cracked sand, and I was trying to paint the sort of like crevices in this cracked thing. And I remember like holding on to this paintbrush like it was, you know, for my dear life. And I think he came over to me and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, your first mark isn't sacred. Just loosen up, man. And like took the paintbrush out of my hands, which also was like, what are you doing, you're dick? But then I remember watching him paint a line, and that blew up my whole world. I was like, I don't need to be, like, my first mark isn't sacred. Like, it's really the foundation later on in design. Like, iteration and reworking is what most of us have to do to get somewhere. So with that, I realized the only way to develop was to do a lot of work. And I would go to the painting studio, and I would go home, and instead of going out and partying, I would lock myself in my room, I would listen to vinyl, I'd listen to the Hammond B3 stuff, and then I would draw for hours on end, and then I would fill my room with works on paper, and like just trying to work fast and hard and see where it went. And like stop worrying about being so uptight, stop worrying about being so pretentious. A couple years ago, in 2009, I ran into a audio excerpt from Ira Glass, who, if anybody knows, he's the host and producer for This American Life, the radio show. And he has a rather long quote, and this is part of it. I was going to sort of paraphrase. He says, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told this to me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste, which is totally true. But there is a gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, that thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through a lot of years of this. We know our work doesn't have the special thing that we want it to have. You got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. It's only by going through a volume of work that you will close this gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And like that I think that's massive for no matter what we create. I think that's just absolutely massive. I think there's a small percentage of people that we see out there that have a lot of luck and paired with talent, but for most of us, it's about doing a lot of work. In college, I was exposed to, by the same painting professor, to a woman painter, Agnes Martin, who really broke the mold. This is the dragon part. She was a painter, sort of a minimalist painter, but she considered herself an abstract expressionist. And she sort of, I think, left New York in 1967 and then moved to Cuba, New Mexico, and didn't paint for 7 years and went totally quiet, and then came back with, and also went out of her way to destroy all her earlier work, so there's no recorded history of it, which is pretty amazing. She's very hardcore in her writings, and I really appreciate it, actually. So she's not really known for any work besides anything after like 1974. I, after school, moved to New Mexico, and it was one of the reasons I moved there, because I was so inspired by this woman. And I got to see some of her work up close, but she wrote an essay. She has this book called On Writings, I think, that other people have compiled some of her writings about becoming an artist and the struggle and growth in your early career. And so she wrote an essay called On the Perfection Underlying Life. She sort of talks about that thing I said at the beginning, that sort of anxiety, that uncertainty, that uncomfortability, that we're not good enough, we can't do this. But she sort of brought it to life and painted this picture that we all have this dragon living inside of us. And most of the time that dragon's awake and he's breathing fire. And artists have a self-destructive tendency. And if you're not destroying yourself, you may be destroying somebody else close to you. And that you fight this stuff all the time. And really the way things are is that most of the time the dragon is awake and we are asleep. And then she sort of, one of her key quotes in this talk that always resonated with me was that sometimes through hard work the dragon is weakened. The result the resulting quiet is shocking. The work proceeds quickly and without effort. And I think anybody who's ever gotten into it, we battle, we don't feel like we're good enough, and maybe one day you just hit this thing and all goes quiet, and that work pours out of you. And those moments don't last very long, but it's certainly the moments that I know as a creative individual that I still look for and probably will never stop looking for. And so another quote from it is, "We cannot and do not slay the dragon. We have to become completely familiar with him and hope that he sleeps." Sort of a continuation of this. Part 3, negative capability. And so I got out of college, moved to New Mexico. I worked for nearly 8 years in between New Mexico and Colorado at small ad agencies, at web design firms, learning technology along with the design, along with still doing art. I think my place in New Mexico for a long time had zero furniture. Well, had a kitchen table, a record player, an easel, and a bed, and the Penguin Guide to Jazz on CD. And that's pretty much I went home and that's all I did. And certainly there was a computer in there and sort of pushed that. That first job out of school too, I remember another defining moment this is a quote from old designer from my first job. And I'm sure that designer was probably my age now. And I remember talking to her about what I was doing, and she looks at me and she goes, "Oh, I was once like you. When you get older, you'll lose that drive." That really pissed me off. And I was again, it's sort of that first slide where I said, I want to be that one person that beats the odds, that has longevity in a creative career. This was another moment in my life where I was like, no, you don't know who I am. I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to lose the sort of fire and energy that I have for this. And so 7 or 8 years went by, and I had an opportunity to move to the Bay Area, and I roll into town, and things were actually really tough at that time. I didn't have any money. I had basically gas money and food money to get here, and I didn't know if I was going to continue to freelance or what my plan was going to be. And it got so dire that I knew when I got here I probably had to sell my car to continue to live. My mom called me, and I was talking to her, so this is a quote from my mom. I don't think she's going to be very happy if she ever sees this, because I tell her this all the time. I was talking to her on the phone, and I was I had all this pride, and I didn't want to ask her for money, and I didn't want help. But she said, maybe it's time to throw in the towel. Why don't you look at Home Depot? They have great job growth and benefits. And hey, I'm not dissing Home Depot, but that is about somebody that has had a creative dream since they're a tiny kid. That's about the worst soul-crushing thing you could say to them. You suck, go to Home Depot. That's all I heard. So I got this, I came to the Bay Area. I should say that my whole career, I say that I pimped myself out a bunch. I was just trying to do anything I could in the design world for music too. I didn't care if I was making money at it, if a promoter needed a poster, if I had an opportunity to do album art for some guys I knew or connected through friends. I would take that opportunity and I'd try to pour my heart into it and do the best work I could for that given moment, on top of trying to get paid to do this. So I had a music promoter friend in the Bay Area, and he said, why don't, I think Pandora, this new company is looking for designers, you should check it out. So I came here, and my first 10 minutes of my interview, I was like, this company is going to fail. This doesn't sound interesting at all. Well, I love music. This sounds like, who's going to listen to this thing? Thank God I was wrong. I quickly, as my interview progressed, I met a lot of some of the smartest, most passionate individuals in that round of interviewing that I ever met, and was immediately left BART. I think it was maybe my first BART trip, thinking, wait a minute, this might sound interesting. Maybe I should give it a shot. I'm not doing anything else, and I'm sort of poor. So I was the only designer, I was the first designer that ever started here, and I sat in a hallway, and I don't want to go into the work that I did. It was the individuals that I met that also continued to shape my fever for this stuff. And we have an old music curator. His name is Michael Zapruder. He's no longer here because he's doing amazing things with songwriting and composition. And I got the opportunity to sit next to him for, I don't know how long our seats ever lasted then, maybe 3, 4, 5 months. And he said, do you want to collaborate and do some album art for me? And I said, sure, that sounds great. Let's go grab a beer and talk about it. And I had actually done quite a bit of album art. I mean, for somebody at the age I was in doing it, but nobody renowned, but certainly a bunch of people that had albums and were touring a ton and made a living off touring. But most of that for me was like, oh, the musician would be like, I don't know, like these are the concepts of some of the songs, do whatever you want. And it was really fun to be super creative and do whatever you want. Well, Michael was a bit different. He was the first artist that I met, and he had this album that he was going to release called Dragon Chinese Cocktail Horoscope. And he sat with me, and he's like, well, I really want to do artwork because the whole album is based on negative capability. And I was like, what's negative capability? And there's John Keats is a poet from the 1800s, and he wrote in a letter about something called negative capability. And it's when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, ambiguity, and doubt. It was profound to me that, one, he wrote all these songs based on these concepts of living in these states where we don't have to have definitive answers for everything, that it's about the feeling that he's exporting, and he's going to juxtaposition a bunch of random things to create this mystery and ambiguity. And he had this really elaborate theory to his songwriting, and he's like, I want the art to do that. And I was like, uh-oh, like, I don't know. I'm super down, like, I want to be part of this. I don't care if there's any money attached to it, like, let's go for it. And it's just something, though, you know, we went through a great process. We worked together. He was very happy, and I learned a lot. But it's this thing of negative capability that growing as a leader at Pandora, coming from one designer myself to a team of 43 to hopefully later this year, we're at 68-something creatives. You don't know. Being a leader, you don't have all the answers all the time, and you have to be comfortable with existing in states where you're uncertain, you don't know things. And you have to try to navigate that with confidence and exist in that realm. So, but I wanted to end it with one last quote from an artist, and maybe the most outwardly rebellious. If anybody knows David Cho, the painter, he went to school in Oakland for a short stint and ran around Oakland doing graffiti art. Certainly a favorite. Upper Playground San Francisco puts out a lot of his stuff. And he wrote a rather risque, he's just like no filter to this guy, amazing insights and artwork, but I'm going to sort of edit his to be a little bit more apparent. I'm going to read the longer thing. He said, every art school kid thinks I have the golden answer, or there's some secret to my success. And I do give them advice, but in the end, most or all will fail. Because advice is one thing, but following it is another. I set out on a path, this journey years ago. I sacrificed all, no turning back. I will die for this shit, and most people don't understand that. Most people want a well-balanced life, like a well-balanced meal, but you can't have it all. Something has to get lost in the fire. There is no balance. You may make a choice like Kiefer in 24, and then ride it till you die. And I think that's poetic and pretty beautiful, and there's a lot of truth there. While it's rather hardcore, it's pretty profound and something that I believe in, and again, ties to a lot of the concepts that I talked about today. I appreciate everybody coming out. We're going to be hanging around. Feel free in the Q&A to ask me or find me afterwards.